Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is once again that time of the week. Oh, what time is it? You may ask, you may wonder. Well, it's that time of the week where we peel back the propaganda, where we dig underneath the headlines and call out the establishment on its BS. It's a weekly program. We talk about politics at the local and national level, local activism, and all things radical and revolutionary. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program. Now, as always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 FM WIDR Kalamazoo or Western Michigan University. So, I guess I'll start the show. Let's talk a little bit about some local events that happened over the weekend, or I guess I should really say over the course of this week. One of which on Monday I actually went and participated in, and I wanted to give a particular shout out to a local group for putting this on. Kalamazoo Nonviolent Opponents of War on Monday held an event over at Sarkozy's Bakery. It's called Valentine's for Palestine. And I have an interview with one of the organizers, and I'll be playing that in a moment. But just to give a brief background, essentially what it is everybody gathered around, ate little various pastries, drank some tea and coffee. There's lots of construction paper and glue sticks and art supplies, and people essentially made Valentines for a young woman named Ahed Tamimi. And if you're a long-time listener, my guess you probably you would know that name, but if not, I will explain that quite shortly. But for now, why don't we go ahead? Let's go. We're going to play an interview with one of the organizers of the event. And you have them talk about it straight from the activist's mouth, as it were. Could you please introduce yourself real quick for the listeners?
Hi, I'm Dan Smith, and I'm with Kalamazoo Nonviolent Opponents of War, or KNOW.
So we're here today over at Sarkozy's Bakery, and y'all are making Valentines down here. And just wanted to ask real quick, so this is Valentines for Palestine. Can you talk a little bit about what this is and why KNOW decided to organize it?
Well, the situation is very dire for the people of Palestine on the West Bank living under military occupation, and particularly for the children. There's been thousands of Palestinian children that are caught up in the jails and the military prisons in the West Bank and in Israeli prisons. So this is, we want to ask Fred Upton to support an act called 4391, which is called the Promoting Human Rights by Ending Israeli Military Detention of Palestinian Children. And then as well, we're writing another Valentine, which is going to go to Ahed Tamimi.
And could you for those who maybe are listening and they're not familiar with Ahed Tamimi's story, why are you sending Valentine specifically to her?
Well, the Tamimi family lives in a very small village, and what happened was the Israelis built an illegal settlement right outside their village, and then they prohibited the villagers from accessing the spring, which is outside their village, which they had used for hundreds and thousands of years. So every week they would have a march to the spring. They would be met by dogs, tear gas, stun grenades by the Israeli military to keep them from reaching the spring. So Ahed Tamimi has kind of grown up in that unfortunate situation, but her family is supportive of her What happened was her brother was shot by a rubber-coated steel bullet. Many in her family have been injured by the military, the military doing night raids, breaking into her house. One day she just couldn't take it anymore. The military, the IDF, broke into her house, and in the course of that, she slapped one of the soldiers. Well, that was inexcusable, and she's in prison now, and the Israeli politicians are calling for her to get a long prison term. So we're fighting for her freedom, and we're sending her a Valentine to her prison. So hopefully she'll get it. The idea is to keep her spirits up and tell her we support her.
All right. And again, a big thanks and shout out to KNOW for organizing something local around here. It's always important, and I think we lose sight of this sometimes, to show local solidarity for some of these international struggles. We often get caught up in a very localized frame, whether we are local activists or just members of the community. And we talk a lot on the show about issues involving American imperialism, international tensions of warfare. And it's good to have groups like KNOW out there who are really making an effort to push that issue, like here locally in the Kalamazoo community. And furthermore, if you want to know more about them, they are on Facebook, and they are also every Sunday, I believe at noon. They have a vigil outside the Federal Building downtown. They've been doing that since, I believe, at least 10 years. It was since the Iraq War. So, just kind of filling in a few more bits and pieces there. It's important to note, and a lot of people don't mention this in the story, the Israeli soldier actually slapped Ahed first. So, even in that context, it was really like a natural response to what was going on between her and this Israeli soldier. And as the organizer mentioned, this is a young woman who has dealt with this crushing oppression from the Israeli state for her entire life. I would suggest, if you get the time, look up. There's a really great interview with her and the journalist Abby Martin, who she spent a lot of time covering the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Actually went inside of Palestine and covered it. Tried to get kind of their perspective, which is something that is very rare, especially in American media. If you ever watch or really pay attention to the way the American media deals with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, they essentially take the Israeli side about 99% of the time. And there are a lot of political reasons for that. We could probably do an entire show going into the minutia of it. I would say if you are interested in really learning how and why we get the kind of news we get about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there's a very good documentary. It's called Occupation of the American Mind. Actually, narrated by none other than Roger Waters, the Pink Floyd and The Wall and the such. And it really goes on a deep dive into kind of why we get this very one-sided narrative that basically paints Palestine as this state full of these terrorists who just kill innocent Israeli people for no reason. This isn't to condone violence on either side, but for the amount of violence that Palestine has perpetrated on Israel, I mean, one, there is a reason, and it is also nowhere near proportional to the amount of violence that the Israeli state has hammered upon Palestine. I'd say, like, if you haven't been following, Israeli-Palestine issues, keep in mind, like, the backdrop of, this young woman who's become kind of the symbol of resistance with this slap. This is in a Palestine where Israel is doing these illegal settlements that have been condemned by most of the world, except, the United States. And when they do these illegal settlements, they come in. It's kind of like how eminent domain works in America, except there's no offer to buy out. They basically just show up, tear down your home, and then an Israeli settler family moves in there. Typically some pretty right-wing type folks. One of the really interesting things, especially following local Israeli politics in the wake of the Trump presidency, is their politics in Israel have skewed so far to the right, where Benjamin Netanyahu, who is essentially a Trump-like figure in Israeli politics, or at least as far as where he stands on the political spectrum, he lies in the center or the center left. Again, I'd say, like, the best resource to find out more of this stuff about what's actually going on in Israel, check out some of the episodes of the Empire Files where Abby Martin actually goes there, and so really chilling. Like, there's on the street interviews talking to Israeli after Israeli after Israeli who talks about Palestinians in terms of just, like, wiping them out and death to Palestine, speaking of them as though they were dogs. And that spectrum has increasingly shifted over the years. And actually, in the last several years, a lot of the more liberal or left-leaning Israelis, and this is a bit of historical irony, many of them are moving to more liberal cities in Europe, particularly Berlin. Yeah, the irony. She's living in this oppressive regime where, they basically, it's like an apartheid state. Show me your papers. It's very similar to the way that black people in the United States are treated by our police, except, whereas here there's at least a, what's the word I'm looking for? A charade of jurisprudence. Over there really isn't. They have to go through checkpoints every several miles. There will be just arbitrary punishment. Israeli soldiers have been known to target nonviolent protesters with lethal force time and time again, and there's been absolutely no punishment. And indeed, that when we talk about international solidarity, that's very important to kind of touch on as well, because there are through lines between the way that our kind of right-wing authoritarian police state functions and the way that Palestine does, and the fact that America really upholds that and funds that. And frankly, like, a lot of the military equipment that Israel uses to subjugate Palestine is produced here, right in the good old U.S. of A. If we can't sell enough of it to our local police departments, we give a bunch of it away to Israel. There's been actually several defense packages sent that way, and most of that money is primarily spent on police equipment so that they can go in to the Palestinian area and violently crush protesters. It really is gross. Like, last summer, they were cutting off power to Palestine for sometimes for days at a stretch, 20 hours out of the day. They were basically just crushing and inducing poverty and starvation-like living conditions for several months on end. So, this is kind of the environment that Ahed Tamimi's slap occurred in. And I wanted to bring into this an article from... where is it? Where'd it go? Oh, there it is. Okay, this is an article from The Guardian, because there is actually some recent news about this. It's just published yesterday from The Guardian. And the trial of Ahed Tamimi started yesterday behind closed doors. And I'll read a little bit from it right now. Teenage Palestinian protester filmed slapping and kicking two soldiers outside her home has appeared before an Israeli military court to face various charges, including assaulting security forces, incitement, and throwing stones. Ahed Tamimi, who turned 17 in jail last month, arrived on Tuesday morning to be for the first day of what could be a months-long trial in what has become a symbolic case in the battle for international public opinion. The judge ordered a closed-door hearing and ejected a large group of journalists who had gathered at the Ofer military base, despite a request by Tamimi's lawyer for the media to be able to observe the proceedings. Arrested in the middle of the night and since denied bail, Tamimi could spend years in prison for what prosecutors argue was a criminal offense. She faces 12 charges, some of which date back to 2016. Tamimi's father, Bassem, said on Tuesday that he arrived at trial with no good expectations because this is a military court and it's parts of the Israeli military occupation. Some of Israel's critics have said the case epitomizes its brutal approach half a century after its forces captured the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. Tamimi comes from the village of Nabi Saleh, where regular protests from its several hundred residents have often ended with stone throwing. Since her early years, she has become an international poster girl for the anti-occupation movement. Rights groups have called for her immediate release. As an unarmed girl, Ahed posed no threat during the altercation with the two Israeli soldiers who were heavily armed and wearing protective clothing, said Magdalene Mugrabi, Amnesty International's deputy director for the Middle East and Africa. Yet again, the Israeli authorities have responded to acts of defiance by a Palestinian child with measures that are entirely disproportionate to the incident in question. Hysteria over how the world perceives Tamimi, who comes from a family with a long history of both peaceful and violent resistance against the occupation, has spread across both societies. The footage of Tamimi led to the teenager being hailed as a hero by some Palestinians, who saw her as standing up to Israel's occupation of the West Bank. One senior Israeli official recently revealed he had asked a parliamentary committee to investigate whether the blonde, blue-eyed Tamimi family were real Palestinian. Oh my God! Sorry, it's a little. That just goes to show, and this is kind of a stray thought, but I can't really think of how disappointing this really is to hear. Israel has fallen quite a bit. I mean, its beginnings weren't very rosy at all, either. But, ostensibly the justification for it was, the Jewish people needed a place to stay after the horrors of the Holocaust. And you hear that kind of rhetoric in their governments. It's a really, really dark historical irony. And, it particularly is, when I hear these news stories about Israeli oppression against Palestinians, I go back often to, I visited Auschwitz several years ago, about 4 years ago when I was backpacking around Europe. And suffice to say, you can feel the ghosts when you walk in there. I think about that on a personal perspective, and it's like, how can a people who went through something like that be capable of just turning right around and oppressing another people's, using some of the very same tactics and some of the same thought patterns that the Nazis used in World War II and the lead up to it. As a matter of fact, let me read from the end. She is not a little girl, she is a terrorist, said the cultural minister Miri Regev before the trial. It's about time that they understand that people like her have to be in jail and not be allowed to incite to racism and subversion against the state of Israel. Yep. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll jump on another topic. I'm going to do a brief musical interlude. The Hoodrat Strategist has to use the restroom. I'm flying solo today. My co-host could not make it in. So it's just going to be you and me, ladies and gentlemen. So enjoy the quick musical interlude. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
may not be apparent, but hunger is a rather prominent issue amongst the student body of Western. The Invisible Need Project is a multifaceted initiative that's aimed to help struggling students.
Every 2 weeks, generous people donate their food to the pantry located in their Fawn Student Service buildings or other drop-off locations. All you need to do is grab a reusable bag and grab whatever food you need to help sustain yourself. If anyone's unsure when their next meal will be, or if you have a little extra food you'd be willing to donate, the food pantry is your place. If you're looking to help donate, become a volunteer, or just learn more, call 269-387-4742 or email dosa-inp@wmich.edu for details.
Are you trying to get your local Kalamazoo business name out to the WMU and Greater Kalamazoo communities? Why not do so while supporting Radio Evolution through underwriting and donations? For more information, please visit widrfm.org.
Love hasn't been on my side. The sun's forgotten to shine lately in my sky. But I'm remembering who I am. A part of me.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So let's go ahead. Let's hop to a local story that gives some context to, the legalization movement in Michigan has made some very big strides in the last couple of years, but it's facing an issue that's really been a problem for all the states that have legalized thus far. And that linchpin is. That catch is that while states may legalize either recreational or medical marijuana use, it is still a federal crime. Now, up until the Trump administration, it was kind of assumed that, and the Obama administration, to their credit, did say this, that they weren't going to pursue judiciary action against sellers and users of marijuana. Of course, Jeff Sessions has this whole boner about restarting the war on drugs and stuff. So, that's but that's a bit of a separate issue from where we're at now, which is it's not necessarily out of concern that that racist Keebler Elf is going to send the DEA after all of us. It's that banks legally have some problems taking money from marijuana industries. And so this is an article on MLive put up today. It's written by Emily Lawler, and the headline is, Michigan created an $837 million medical marijuana industry with nowhere to put its cash. So I'm going to read a little bit from this, talk about it a little bit more. I just kind of gave y'all the kind of overall context, but go ahead and read a little bit from this important article on this very important topic. Michigan lawmakers authorized a new medical marijuana industry in 2016. And the state began accepting applications to be part of it on December 15th, 2017. But businesses seeking inclusion are already running into a roadblock. Banks won't take their money. And I'll probably read, the first part of the article talks about how applications to be part of this about $6,000. There is a Bureau of Medical Marijuana Regulation in the state of Michigan. That's the actual institution that you go through for this. Article continues, it's not that banks don't want to, it becomes a very significant risk, said Patricia Herndon, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for the Michigan Bankers Association. Federally, marijuana is still considered a Schedule I substance, a category that means the government considers it to have no medical use and a high potential for addiction. Well, I mean, I think we all could colloquially say, colloquially say, marijuana does foster addiction to Doritos and cartoons. And now, to be serious though, again, we like to always put a little bit of historical perspective on this, and yeah, it has been medically disproven there is no actual chemical addiction to marijuana. It does not interact with your brain chemistry that way. Now, there's always the potential for psychological addiction. Particularly, I think a lot of people with depression, it's been shown have a potential to abuse marijuana. But again, like the bad health outcomes of marijuana, quote unquote, abuse usually just means, you're not really doing all that much, sitting on the couch, watching the Netflix, probably eating a little bit more pizza than you really should. All in all, not nearly as harmful as other legal substances, like, say, a lot of painkiller opioids or alcohol, for example. And we should also remember that there were a lot of heavy political considerations that went into the initial prohibition of marijuana back in the day. A lot of which actually had a lot to do, speaking of racist Keebler elves like Jeff Sessions, with certain like xenophobic propaganda. One of the big hitting points that was used in the whole kind of reefer madness propaganda wave to prohibit marijuana is that most of the marijuana at that time, which this would be in the late 20s and early 30s, was imported from Mexico. So they used a lot of the same kind of race-baiting language that the Trump administration currently uses against Mexican immigrants. Talk about how like there's crime being brought up, this seedy drug that, according to our neat little propaganda film, will turn you into an like some sort of evil monster, and it'll make you jump out a window and all that garbage. So again, yeah, it's still pretty ridiculous that marijuana is still a Schedule I drug. So ridiculous, in fact, that many states have superseded the federal government to say, this really isn't as harmful as the federal government lets on. States like Colorado, California, Maine, for instance. The article goes on. The revenue from a state-authorized medical or recreational marijuana business can potentially be viewed as drug money by the federal government. In Michigan, medical marijuana is legal, and its industry is projected to expand rapidly. A House Fiscal Agency analysis of the bill lawmakers approved projected it would grow to $837 million annually. That's pretty impressive. That's not even... and keep in mind, that's in a state that's not even allowing it recreationally yet. States like Colorado, it's just this huge tax windfall. As of February 2nd, there are already 146 businesses who have submitted pre-qualifications with the Bureau of Medical Marijuana Regulation, and another 618 had started the online application process. But without being able to rely on basic banking services, those medical marijuana business owners are struggling with how to maintain or to remain above board. Paul Samways, an accountant with Cannabis Accounting, said he's currently going out to clients to count their cash. And when the businesses start operating under the new scheme, it only gets more complicated if they can't cut checks or store money. These guys aren't hiding stuff in their mattress. They want to be above board. They want to make sure everybody knows what's going on. They want to pay their taxes. How do you do it without a bank account? Samways asked. Acting as a bank for a medical marijuana business was a thorny issue to begin with, and one that's gotten even more difficult in wake of a memo issued by racist Keebler elf Jeff Sessions last month. Banks that want to handle medical marijuana business money have to do a lot of due diligence at a high upfront cost to ensure compliance with the Bank Secrecy Act and anti-money laundering rules, Herndon said. But back on January 4th, Sessions repealed an Obama-era policy known as the Cole Memo, which instructed federal prosecutors since 2013 not to prioritize the enforcement of federal anti-marijuana laws in some instances where states had their own marijuana laws in the books. And we were talking about that just as kind of we started on the topic. That's the actual long and hard and fast of it. Now federal prosecutors are using their discretion on the enforcement of federal marijuana laws. That rescission adds even greater uncertainty to this, Herndon said. I will say that they continue to look at this. There's been no declaration from the U.S. District Attorney that there's going to be an active force in that direction. For that move, there had been an uptick nationally in banks serving the medical marijuana industry. According to a report from the Federal Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, 400 financial institutions were banking with marijuana businesses in September of 2017, which represented steady growth. And some states have found ways around needing buy-in from financial institutions. In Hawaii, state officials collaborated with a cashless service called CanPay and Safe Harbor Private Banking, a marijuana-specific financial institution, to let medical marijuana businesses handle transactions. In Maryland and Florida, banks have quietly popped up to fill the void. But Florida's bank is backing out now. With Michigan's industry coming online at the same time banks are grappling with the Sessions memo, it's not clear that any financial institutions will rush in to fill the void. Families looked into the possibility of starting a state-chartered credit union that would accept medical marijuana money a few years ago. The problem he ran into, he said, is that he couldn't get a master account in the Federal Reserve without compromising the medical marijuana money. What happens if you don't have a Federal Reserve master account? You can't cash checks or take debit cards or transfer money in the money superhighway, he said. As of now, Herndon said, no Michigan bank has publicly come forward as accepting medical marijuana money. Now, this next part of the article is pretty interesting because we're going to talk a little bit about what local elected officials are doing to get around this. And this is actually pretty interesting because this is a Republican that we're about to talk about. Which, by the way, if you there's a growing bipartisan consensus around marijuana. One of the more interesting things about it is, it's something that is very much tied to a very strong wave of changing attitudes. Most younger Republicans view it as like a personal liberty issue, not altogether dissimilar from libertarians, where it's basically why should the government be getting involved in this when it's my personal choice, it's my personal decision. And even some Republicans who are still against marijuana, one of Colorado's representatives, I believe, he got on Jeff Sessions' butt after this memo. It just taken him to town for it's like, I don't agree with marijuana use, but the constituents of my state do, and we need to uphold their rights. So, that's kind of like the environment we're in. Jeff Sessions is from this old school of politicians who, want to use it as a weapon in the drug war. As we're going to talk a little bit more about lately, as to really push his very racist justice agenda, injustice agenda, more specifically. But there's a growing bipartisan consensus, and it's I would say it's at a similar tipping point we were with gay marriage several years ago, where, you know, it's not a question of when, it's a question, or it's not a question of it's if, it's a question of when. Marijuana will be legalized in every state, whether it's state by state or at the federal level. And, you know, the Trump administration, and like as it is in many aspects, is a very large bump in the road, but is also galvanizing activists in a way that hasn't happened in recent years. And as a matter of fact, you know, in the wake of the Trump administration, has made marijuana advocates push even harder for legalization. So in that context, Representative Clint Kesto, Republican of Commerce Township, is the sponsor of House Bill 5144, which was signed into law last month. It takes several refinements to the medical marijuana law the state passed in December of 2016. Among the changes, it specifies that an accountant or financial institution providing services to someone licensed under the Medical Marijuana Act wouldn't be subjected to penalties. Kesto said the intent was not to hold banks accountable for providing somebody with their banking records. Because in order to apply for a license, you have to go and get your banking records. So if you went to the teller or the clerk or whoever was going to assist you, then we don't want to subject them to any criminal laws that then may be out there. We specifically codify that, Kesto said. The same idea applies to certified public accountants, he said. To apply for a license to be a medical marijuana grower, processor, tester, transporter, or dispensary, applicants have to prove they meet a capital requirement, which is often dependent on financial records. It's CPAs who provide an attestation that applicants have met those requirements. And actually, we have some problems with this. We've talked about this earlier on the show. How much money does a medical marijuana business need to start up in Michigan? Well, would you ask? And this isn't even talking about like the cost of equipment and leasing the land and buying a property. The actual fees involved, $500,000. $500,000. And, you know, we're talking about on the show, I'm like, that's a horrible, it's a slap in the face, particularly to low-income communities who have been part of the underground illegal sale of marijuana for years, decades. You know, these are people, particularly like in our black communities, who have been, have their lives destroyed for selling this plant that is, you know, mostly harmless. And now, when it looks like just over the horizon, there is an opportunity to turn these skills and experience into a legitimate business enterprise, giant financial roadblock, or wall, I guess I should say. Because $500,000, that ensures that a low-income person cannot start like a nice little mom and pop dispensary. There's actually I've had some conversations with some of my activist friends on the north side, and one of the things they were discussing is that there were talks of putting a dispensary in the north side. Was it a north side resident who was looking into it? Is it somebody who is part of the north side neighborhood or that community? No. It was outside investors. I believe they said they were somewhere from they said Middle East. I can't remember particularly which country, but basically wealthy outside investors wanting to put a dispensary on the north side, which is absolutely back-ass-words. I give a lot of credits. Check out what the gubernatorial candidate Abdul Al-Sayed has to say about it. He has a really good answer on this about making sure that as we build up a marijuana industry in Michigan, that we do it in a way that can benefit and prioritizes small businesses and enables communities to be autonomous and, again, use these skill sets, this acumen, this experience in a way that benefits the community and not just wealthy outsiders who want to make a buck off of them. You know, in my mind, it's all the difference between a community market and somebody setting up another liquor store in the north side. Because I'm sure, like, some outside investor isn't going to be looking out for the health of the community, whereas, you know, somebody who is trying to start a legitimate business, they are. They will. I'll keep reading and say I got diverted a little bit. It goes on to say that's just for the application process. But when marijuana businesses actually start pulling in money, they'll run into another problem. One Kesto acknowledges. Where are they supposed to store it? I think it makes a lot of people nervous. I bet the people who have to hold that cash are nervous because that makes them a target as well, Kesto said. Law enforcement is probably nervous because they have to enforce the laws if there's theft or robberies or what have you. So I think we have to be cognizant of that. Representative Pete Lucido, a Republican of Shelby Township, is looking to answer that with House Joint Resolution CC, which would create a state bank capable of handling money from marijuana businesses. Without some kind of solution, he said, Michigan would have a huge industry that basically lacked the ability to put its revenue back into the community. Right now, he said, people could get stuck keeping it in mattresses and coffee cans. What other safe harbor do we have? If the banks can't touch the proceeds and the credit unions can't touch the proceeds from the sale of marijuana, then what do we leave those that are in the businesses that are regulated by the state as it relates to licensing? Even the labs that test it would be barred from putting the proceeds into the bank or credit union because it violates federal law, Lucida said. So far, Lucida said, South Dakota is the only other state with a state bank. We talked about that on the show before too. I believe it was actually I think that was North Dakota. Not that I'm correcting the article, but I've heard a lot and done a lot of research into the state bank of North Dakota, and I'm not sure, maybe South Dakota has one too. But anyway, it says that they authorized it close to 100 years ago and don't have medical marijuana, but Michigan has a chance to open their own and be a leader, he said. And by the way, like I'm pretty surprised to hear a local Republican advocating a state bank, but yeah, interesting fellow, Mr. Lucido. Anyway, okay. He goes on. He doesn't necessarily think a state bank competing with a private banking service is a good idea, but right now it's what he's got. So, we absolutely have to have like a socialist bank, and even though it's a good idea, don't tell all my capitalist friends. Hey, I would surely think that if the banking industry and credit union industry had an alternative, they can sure knock on my door and give it to me, Lucida said. Magnitude of the problem. Okay. Try as state lawmakers might, it's not clear that they have the power to address the issue, at least through regular banks. Very little can be done at this point at the state level to impact the prohibitions and obstacles that are put in place that are keeping us from jumping into this, Herndon said. Right now, the state's talking about a potentially $837 million medical marijuana industry with banking issues. But if a ballot initiative to legalize recreational marijuana for adult use passes, even more businesses and more dollars could have trouble accessing traditional banking systems. And that is something that's on the horizon. There's been, I know I've seen people canvassing around for medical marijuana legalization. I don't think it's going to be on the ballot this November. I could be wrong about that. I'll have to look it up. But I know this is something that's been on in the cards for a while. MI Legalize has been doing a lot of work, particularly on the east side of the state around this issue. And just another quick quote. Josh Hovey, a spokesperson for the Coalition to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol, it's a legalization group, said, we're thinking that once the market is fully established, that Michigan could be generating anywhere from $100 million to $200 million a year in tax revenue. All right, and He goes on to say, I think it's something that Congress is starting to look at and realizing there's a whole lot of money out there that the IRS needs to be collecting, that state governments need to be collecting, Hovey said. So, that is where we're at. And, it is one of the biggest hurdles when it comes to dealing with, this marijuana issue. Because, even in the Obama years when they had that kind of moratorium on federal money, it was still a legal difficulty with banks. Because it is technically illegal to keep that money, there was always this weird gray area where, it was legal in the state, but illegal at the federal level. So, it's always about the national bank having to take on some kind of financial risk. I ought to say, I really like the idea that this could be the impetus to get Michigan a state bank. It's actually worked very well in North Dakota. They were one of the few states that really didn't feel as much of a tremendous impact from the financial crash in 2008, because again, their banking and finances were largely independent from the casino-style shenanigans of Wall Street. So, that would be a really great double-edged sword. But, I think there also there needs to be a concurrent push for legalization at the federal level, because right now we're just at the mercy of the presidential administration. Maybe in 2020, 2024, we'll get some super progressive president who will go back to that Obama stance on marijuana, but maybe we'll get another right-winger in who hates marijuana. I think it's a matter of time, but there also needs to be a concurrent push at the federal level, because otherwise they're just going to keep running into this problem. Or, we could just overthrow the state, but, that's... I mean at the federal level, by the way. I would say if we don't get a major revolution of the working class in the next couple years, I'm just saying, that's another thing. Focus on decriminalizing marijuana at the federal level, or national uprising revolution type dealio. I'm personally for that option, but just to be pragmatic, if the state continues to survive in some form, push for legalization. All right, we're gonna take a break. You are listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
But I got to be in a movie. I had a small scene in the movie. But I got to act with Peter Frampton. He was in the movie. And we had to smoke pot for our scene. But it was fake pot. Do not buy pot on a movie set. But I got to smoke fake pot with Peter Frampton. That's a cool story. It's as cool as smoking real pot with a guy who looks like Peter Frampton.
WIDR.
I've done that way more.
Your only source for non-commercial radio.
Now stay away from me, Frampton. I ain't got to say to you.
WIDR is proud to be supported by Pedal Bicycle. Pedal Bicycle has 2 locations on 611 West Michigan Ave and 185 Romans Road. More information can be found at pedalbicycle.com. You are now listening to our weekly RSO Spotlight.
my name is Adriana Turner. I'm the Vice President of Sigma Tau Delta, the Alpha Nu Phi chapter here at WMU. We're holding an open poetry event in Brown 3025, so you can bring your own creative writing next Tuesday, the 30th, and it has a freedom theme. We highly encourage reading the Book of Unknown Americans by Cristina Enriquez, which is the common read for our chapter. And you can contact me at adrianna.g.turner@wmish.edu.
For more information on this week's RSO, you can visit westernherald.com, YBOT WMU on YouTube, or widerfm.org.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution. So let's hop into, we were just talking a little bit about how Jeff Sessions was mucking about with our marijuana laws. He said something very interesting last week. I wanted to read from an article in Salon that it's one of the funny things about the Trump administration is, like, occasionally they will basically they tell 1,000 egregious lies a day, and usually it's Trump that does this. They'll say something that is just totally on the nose for what the system really is and what it really does. One of my favorite examples is this, when Trump was talking about Iraq, and he's just like, why don't we just go get the oil? Why don't we just get the oil and leave? Because usually most presidents like George Bush and Obama, they're like, oh, we're going there to defend freedom. Oh, freedom and democracy. Trump just cuts right to the state. Oh, we're getting their oil. What can't we say? Like this. As a matter of fact, like, there's this great author, kind of divisive, Caitlin Johnstone. You love her, you hate her. And I don't agree with everything she puts out, but she did a really great takedown of Donald Trump recently, talking about how, like, just basically debunking a lot of the myths that the Trump supporters have evolved around him. And one of the things that she really hits on is, like, he is not fighting the deep state. He is helping the deep state. He's surrendered to their agenda. Okay, we're starting to go down a different rabbit hole than I originally intended. But I guess just to surmise, if Trump has any problems with the deep state, it's that the deep state is mad at him for making their agenda too obvious, and perhaps they might be a little bad about Jeff Sessions right about now too, because recently he was at this conference in front of a bunch of law enforcement, and he said, and I quote, the office of sheriff is a critical part of the Anglo-American heritage of law enforcement. the Anglo-American heritage of law enforcement. That is like a dog whistle, if there ever was one. We're talking about like white people, and the funny thing about it though is he's absolutely right. Because like we talk about the history of this. We've talked a little bit about this before, and how American policing is really descended from the slave patrols and night watches of the antebellum South. Because a lot of people have this misconception that policing is just like this thing that developed organically out of what other Western European nations were doing in the past. What American policing started as and what it looks like today was nothing like the kind of policing they had in places like Europe. As a matter of fact, prior to the development of American policing as a response to the worry that slaves would escape and all that, police forces resembled far more closely kind of like unstructured neighborhood watches. You would have certain like credentialed police people who would break up fights and uphold the law as needed, but there wasn't like a formalized police force in most places. And again, that starts really out of the American tradition. And I wanted to read a little bit from there's this great essay, or a paper, I guess you'd say, by Victor E. Kepler that goes into this in detail. A Brief History of Slavery and the Origins of American Policing. The institution of slavery and the control of minorities, however, were two of the most formidable historical features of American society shaping early policing. Slave patrols and night watches, which later became modern police departments, were both designed to control the behaviors of minorities. For example, New England settlers appointed Indian constables to police Native Americans. The St. Louis police were founded to protect residents from Native Americans in that frontier city, and many southern police departments began as slave patrols. In 1704, the colony of Carolina developed the nation's first slave patrol. Slave patrols helped to maintain the economic order and to assist the wealthy landowners in recovering and punishing slaves who essentially were considered property. Policing... let me go down a little bit, because there's another part of this I really want to hit on. It goes on to say too, like kind of how this developed, post-slavery. Extreme violence against people of color became even worse with the rise of vigilante groups who resisted Reconstruction. Because vigilantes, by definition, have no external restraints, lynch mobs had a justified reputation for hanging minorities, mostly black people, first and asking questions later. Because of the tradition of slavery, which rested on the racist rationalization that blacks are subhuman, America had a long and shameful history of mistreating people of color long after the Civil War. Perhaps the most infamous American vigilante group was the Ku Klux Klan. And it goes on to say, basically how the Klan, they would commit these acts, and but a lot of those people were part and parcel of the policing structure of those communities. And we're going to go into an article in a little bit that's, this still occurs to this day. But it's really important to understand that a lot of people talk about policing as like, oh, it's a few bad apples, or it's not all of them, or like, well, there are non-white police officers, and that may be true, but the actual origins, the foundation that modern policing is built upon, were these organized units that sought to punish and terrorize and kill and destroy the lives of Black and Native folks, and as we see later in history, particularly Hispanic immigrants. Going a little further, the use of patrols to capture runaway slaves was one of the precursors of formal police forces, especially in the South. This disastrous legacy persisted as an element of the police role even after the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In some cases, police harassment simply meant people of African descent were more likely to be stopped and questioned by the police, while on the other extreme, they have suffered beatings and even murder at the hands of white police. And, as we talk about BLM a lot on the show, I don't think I need to tell anybody listening here just how disproportionate it is, the murder rate of, Black folks and other people of color compared to how many white people get shot down by the police. But they're catching up with that too, though. There's been 2 really high-profile incidents this year of a policeman shooting down a poor white person in cold blood. So, maybe enough poor white people get shot by the cops. We won't hear all this Blue Lives Matter stuff, and they'll start to get it a little bit. Sorry, that was really dark and blasé. I'm sorry. As a poor white person myself, I probably shouldn't talk like that. But anyway, sorry. In some cases, police harassment simply meant people of African descent were more likely to be stopped. Oh, sorry. Questions still arise today about the disproportionately high numbers of people of African descent killed, beaten, and arrested by police in major urban cities in America. And that's more of an excerpt, but I'll put a link up to that on the show website, or the Facebook page, that is. But yeah. So again, it's one of those very interesting things to me where, you have Jeff Sessions just kind of like peeling back the curtain a little bit on this is the way people in our power structures actually think. And what their basis is. And I want to use that to pivot to another article. And this is particularly important. The headline is California police worked with neo-Nazis to pursue anti-racist activists, documents show. This is an article from The Guardian. And I thought this was particularly important to talk about on the show because, we're actually, Richard Spencer is going to be in Detroit and Lansing early next month. And it's very important to understand and realize that this legacy of racism and race-based practices that police have engaged in since time immemorial, not time, but, since the last 200 years, I'd say. It is, excuse me. It is still with our police force today. And in fact, beyond just how that filters into the institutional practices of policing, there is also, there are a lot of racist people in the police force. Here in Kalamazoo, there is actually a study that showed that our police have more institutional bias, had more institutional bias than the police in Ferguson, Missouri. And also, let's not forget, the alt-right or, white nationalists have been infiltrating our military and police forces for many many years. So hold on just a moment, folks. Sorry about that, folks. Just had to check in. Got a call from the parents. I wanted to make sure it wasn't some sort of emergency. So, when we talk about how white nationalists have really infiltrated our police, I wanted to get to the guts of this article. And this is written by Sam Levin, published a couple days ago on February 9th. California police investigating a violent white nationalist event worked with white supremacists in an effort to identify counter-protesters and sought the prosecution of activists with anti-racist beliefs, court documents show. The records, which also showed officers expressing sympathy with white supremacists and trying to protect a neo-Nazi organizer's identity, were included in a court briefing from 3 anti-fascist activists who were charged with felonies after protesting at a Sacramento rally. The defendants were urging a judge to dismiss their case and accuse California police and prosecutors of a cover-up and collusion with the fascists. Defense lawyers said the case at the state capitol offers the latest example of U.S. law enforcement appearing to align with neo-Nazi and white supremacist groups while targeting anti-fascist activists. It is shocking and really angering to see the level of collusion and the amount to which the police covered up for the Nazis, said Yvette Filarca, a Berkeley teacher and anti-fascist organizer charged with assault and rioting after participating in the June 2016 Sacramento rally, where she was stabbed and bludgeoned in the head. The people who were victimized by the Nazis were then victimized by the police and the district attorneys. Steve Grippy, Chief Deputy District Attorney prosecuting the case in Sacramento, vehemently denied the claims of bias in an email to The Guardian, alleging that anti-fascist stabbing victims have been uncooperative and noting that his office has filed charges against one member of the Traditionalist Workers' Party. And let me just side note, so about the Traditionalist Workers' Party. They're a neo-Nazi group. And they're one of the more insidious ones to me. They're one of the newer ones, and they call themselves a workers' party. They use a lot of the same talking points that many progressive activists make about the economy, the assault on unions, globalization, etc. But they do it inside this framework of white supremacy and genocide. And they're probably not the physically most violent or dangerous group, but I consider them perhaps the most dangerous group on an ideological level because they are co-opting a lot of the effective talking points of the progressive left in order to make an argument for racist ideologies. So yeah, look up Traditionalist Workers' Party. If you see any of them at the Richard Spencer event, make sure they're not trying to like convert any bystanders to their garbage worldviews, because again, they're probably the most palatable and insidious when it comes to trying to basically infiltrate the working class with their horrible racist views. You know, even Richard Spencer, you know, he has a very specific audience, kind of the racist alt-right neo-Nazi trolls of like 4chan and you know, all the Pepe lovers, and he's got this sort of like he's like the intellectual of the alt-right. As a matter of fact, a lot of kind of old school racists probably don't like that Nancy boy in his nice suits. But the Traditionalist Workers' Party they have the potential to really touch a lot of the people that progressives can and are actively converting. So, please, if you hear anything about the Traditionalist Workers' Party, red flag comes off, and be there to argue back at them, please. Article goes on. Some California Highway Patrol investigation records, however, raised questions about the police's investigative tactics and communication with the Traditionalist Workers' Party. Falarca's attorneys obtained numerous examples where they were treating the white nationalist group as victims and the anti-fascists as suspects. In one phone call with Doug McCormick, identified by police as the TWP affiliate who acquired the permit for the Sacramento rally, the investigator Donovan Ayers warned him that police might have to release his name in response to a public records request. The officer said he would try to protect McCormick. I'm going to suggest that we hold that or redact your name or something until this gets resolved, Ayers told McCormick. Ayers told McCormick, the frickin' neo-Nazi, the policeman told the neo-Nazi, adding that he didn't know who had requested records of the permit, noting, if I did, I would tell you. I'd tell you, you nice little working class Nazi man. Excuse me. Ayers notes that McCormick was armed at the rally with a knife. Yeah. The officer's write-up about an African-American anti-fascist activist included a photo of him at the hospital after the rally and noted that he'd been stabbed in the abdomen, chest, and the head. Ayers, however, treated the protester like a suspect. In the investigation, oh God, the police investigator recommended the man be charged with 11 offenses, including disturbing the peace, conspiracy, assault, unlawful assembly, and wearing a mask to evade police. Oh, and it gets even worse. Let's talk about this next little article here. As evidence, Ayers provided Facebook photos of the man holding up his fist. The officer wrote that the man's Black Power salute and his support for anti-racist activism demonstrated his intent and motivation to violate the civil rights of the neo-Nazi group. Luckily, this black dude wasn't charged, but oh my God, it's that bad. And yeah, it has gotten that bad. Now, wherever you fall on the debate between like protect free speech versus Nazis need a good punch, this idea of false, it's a disgusting false equivalency. For one, and you hear this in a lot of right-wing circles, and there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the Black Power salute. Even if you remember from the 2016, there's this famous image of a Trump supporter woman doing the Nazi salute, and she said later on that it's like, it got misinterpreted. I wasn't doing the Nazi salute. People in the crowd were doing the Black Power salute, and she said, oh, well, so I did the Nazi salute back and told them, like, this is what you're doing. This is what that means. No, that's not what that means. White people have a fundamentally, well, not just white people, but a lot of conservatives have a fundamental misunderstanding of what the Black Power salute is about. It's about black self-independence, reliance, strength in the face of oppression. Again, it relies on this whole idea that people misinterpret movements like Black Lives Matter or the Black Panthers as in terms of supremacy, because especially if you're white, that's the only kind of metric that or filter that you can view this from. Is that if somebody has to be above someone else. So when they see images like the Black Power salute or the Black Panthers, it's like, oh, black people want to have power, have control over us. When no, it's about equality, and it's about respecting their community's desire for autonomy. and that community's desire for respect. So again, they're making this false equivalency that a Black Power salute is somehow a racist image, which again, this officer should probably read a history book, and two, but it's much more endemic of the way that most of the masses of white people, particularly by conservative television like Fox News, have been miseducated about what the Black Power movement was, what its intentions and goals were, and they use that misinterpreted framework to draw an equivalency between them and neo-Nazis. The Black Panthers never called for the extermination of all white people. They never said that black people were the master race. They advocated aggressive and militant self-defense. And in this day and age, this isn't the first time, and how much of it is a wink and a nudge. I remember several months ago, there was a law, and in the language of the law, it was about basically giving police carte blanche to rough up protesters who would block roadways, and they said that protesters should be removed from highways by any means necessary, which is just a big poke in the eye. And it's similar here when cops use language like their anti-racist activism is threatening the civil rights of a neo-Nazi. It's disgusting, it's gross, and it's pretty terrifying just how on their sleeve law enforcement officers are wearing their collusion and sympathy for these racist white nationalists. Officers also worked with Traditionalist Working Party member Derek Pineo to try to identify anti-fascist activist, recordings revealed. Officers interviewed Pineo in jail after he was arrested for an unrelated domestic violence charge. Audio recordings captured investigators saying they brought photos to show him, hoping he'd help them identify anti-fascist activists. The officer said, "We're pretty much going after them," and assured him, "We're looking at you as a victim." That's the police on record, recorded, saying, "We're pretty much going after the anti-fascist activists, and we're looking at you, the Nazi, as a victim." They later noted that Pineo was armed with a knife at the neo-Nazi rally, and that one stabbing victim told officers he believed Pineo was responsible. Under video footage, heirs also noted that Pineo was in the vicinity of another victim at the time he was injured, but the officer said the evidence ultimately wasn't clear. Heirs' report included images and names for 3 other TWP-affiliated men who he said were armed with knives, but also had faced no charges. Allegations of police bias and collusion with neo-Nazis have emerged in similar cases across the U.S. Last year, U.S. prosecutors targeting anti-Trump protesters in Washington, D.C. relied on video evidence from a far-right group with a record of deceptive tactics. And that was Project Veritas, by the way. They're the ones who made that notorious Planned Parenthood video that chopped up a bunch of stuff. It was completely out of context. Police in Charlottesville were widely accused of standing by as Nazis attacked protesters, and a black man who was badly beaten by white supremacists was later charged with a felony. And we talked about that a few months ago on the show too. Sam Menef-Libby, an activist who advocated for protesters charged for Inauguration Day rallies last year, said the government has repeatedly gone to great lengths to target anti-fascists. We have patterns of acknowledged and unacknowledged overlaps between the interests of ultra-right nationalist organizations and the police and prosecutors' offices. So, yeah, with that historical context, just knowing, the police are racist as AF. And, what's true in California is also true here. Keep in mind, like the response to that study that I mentioned earlier about how Kalamazoo has more institutional racism than the Ferguson Police Department. Their main response was like sensitivity trainings. And to his credit, I have heard from sources that Chief Hadley did try to do a little bit more about it, but his hands got tied. That's something still very prevalent. And, a lot of police departments, officers, they realize that the public's eye is on them. Occasionally they let things slip. And, there's still a lot of institutional racism in our police departments because they were literally started to fight for a racist agenda that saw black people as property and as natives as people that needed to be wiped out to make way for the manifest destiny of the U.S. government. So we're going to take a little bit of a break. You're listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Alvan Humane Society is a non-for-profit, no-kill animal shelter that has been serving Allegan, Van Buren, and surrounding areas for almost 50 years. They are hosting their Cares Fund Drive and are over halfway to their $500,000 goal. Alvan can currently house around 30 dogs and 100 cats. Money raised from the Cares campaign will go to build a new shelter, which will expand this capacity by 20%. Alvan Humane Society has 20 dogs and 40 cats that are microchipped, spayed and neutered, and fully vaccinated, ready for adoption right now. To adopt a pet, donate to the Cares Fund Drive, or find out more, feel free to visit them on the web at www.al-van.org.
Wider Battle of the Bands would like to thank Kelvin & Co. for supporting Radio Evolution. Located at 232 East Michigan Avenue, Kelvin & Co. is an all-natural barbecue joint. To find more information about their food options, you can call 269-350-5236 or visit kelvinandcompany.com.
I like digging holes and hiding things inside them. When I grow old, I hope.
There must be something else out there, waiting, just for us. We could run away, just leave, never look back. I don't even care where we go, just far away from here. I'll come with you.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So I think I'm going to wrap the show up just a little bit early today, since, no guests and co-hosts are gone. But I did want to touch on one thing before I left, and I'd really like to, I want to go into larger depth on this in a later show, because this is atrocious. It's like the tax bill all over again. But the Trump administration just put out their proposed budget, and it's bad. It's so bad. Oh, so cartoonishly bad. But it's about $4.4 trillion. And it basically, like, it's just going to completely gut social programs. And hey, it's going to give a bunch more money to. Oh man, who needs more money in our government? Is it is it like healthcare providers? Is it education? We could really use some investment in our public schools and in our universities, or a jobs program. Jobs program would be absolutely great. It help tackle unemployment, or maybe like help maybe ratchet up our Social Security. No. It does all of the opposite things, the opposite of what is good. That's complete. I could describe it as anything better than class warfare in order to subsidize actual warfare. But I'll read a little. This is the release from Democracy Now! And again, I want to talk about this more in depth next week, but I just want to give some specifics. Trump's plan would slash the Department of Education's budget by more than 10%. I should mention too, it's probably going to cut even more than that, because the actual budget calls for more incentives for private and charter schools and less investment into our actual public school system. So it's gonna cut it by even more than 10%. It would sharply reduce income-based student loan repayment plans while ending the public service loan forgiveness program. So, hey, you took out a student loan because you were told you need a degree if you want to get a good job. You need to go to college. Okay, I did that. And it's like, you're poor? Oh, well, too bad. Your loan's never going to get forgiven. You're just going to be in debt forever. Have fun being a debt slave, kid. Trump's budget would cut more than $17 billion from the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, barring food stamp recipients from buying fresh fruit and vegetables. And instead, they want to provide a boxed food delivery program, which essentially, I don't see how this could be good in any way. One, it's a real insult to people who rely on food stamps. And growing up, my family relied on food stamps here and there, just to kind of get through rough patches. Both my parents were working full time, and let's be clear, most people on food stamps do work full time. They work, well, not work full time, but they work at jobs like Walmart that don't pay them enough, that don't give them enough hours on purpose, so that they can have cheap labor that is subsidized by programs like SNAP. But guess what? Now, those same employees, like under this budget proposal, won't even be able to use that food stamp money the way they wish. The government will basically provide them government freaking cheese the way that they used to, back in the day. Giving this budget and this administration all about pushing that whole line that, like, if you are poor or you're struggling to get by, it's your fault and you deserve to be punished. So you know what? You can't pick out your own food at the grocery store. Here's a box full of stuff that, is probably, you know what? I'm going to take a guess and just say the food that ends up in that box is probably going to be the result of lobbying by various food conglomerates. We'll see what ends up in that box, depending on who all has the most money, who all wants to get the most profit out of these damn boxes. Also, the budget would phase out federal funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which we were talking about this the beginning of last year, how Trump was going after PBS. Again, like, that got a huge backlash, and they're trying to do it again. Also supports a lot of public and community radio and TV stations. This comes as McClatchy reports the Trump administration is also considering a plan that would not only impose work requirements for Medicare enrollees, but which would put a lifetime limit on adults' access to Medicaid, which is terrifying to me personally because both of my parents rely very heavily on that program. And like many other millions of people across the country. They are elderly. My parents can't work. They're retired for a reason. My mother has a terrible knee condition. My father is not in any physical condition to work either. And not without going into their medical histories, but I'm looking at this news and I'm like, this is terrifying. And especially considering most of the recipients of Medicaid are in this exact same boat as well. So it's going to impose work requirements that most of them, I'm going to guess, can't actually fulfill. The idea is it's going to eliminate the number of people who could actually get Medicaid in order to fill a gap. And what is that gap? Well, all of these tax cuts that they just gave to the billionaire class, well, that money's going to have to come from somewhere. And it looks like they're going after your damn Medicaid. Our damn Medicaid. Our parents' Medicaid. Meanwhile, Trump's budget would see a 13% rise in spending on weapons and war, bringing the Pentagon's budget to $686 billion. The administration says its plan would add $7.1 trillion to U.S. budget deficits over the next decade, though many economists say that number relies on rosy projections. The budget comes less than 2 months after Trump signed into law one of the largest tax cuts in U.S. history, one that overwhelmingly favors the wealthiest Americans. All I can say, if you got people in your family, particularly if you got Trump supporters in your family that rely on Medicaid, tell them about this. Please tell them about this. Because, these policies are so atrocious. And you got poor Trumpers in your family that have relied on food stamps. Tell them about this. Tell them about this. Tell them about this. These policies are terrible. And, in the mainstream media, most criticism of Trump is coming at his ties to Russia, or they're coming at, the kind of palace intrigue going on with his cabinet. Tell them about this. He is screwing these people over. He's screwing all of us over. It is a boot to the face. All these poor white people who voted for him in the election. Now, you might not be able to sway all those middle class and upper class white people who voted for him in the election, a lot of whom probably just garbage people, but let them know. Let all your poor Trump supporting friends know about this crap. Because he is not for you. He is not for anybody. He is for himself. And that's not to put the Democrats off the hook. I can walk and chew gum at the same time, but this is just, whereas the Obama administration, his cabinet was full of a lot of Citibank appointees and Wall Street folks, and he was a very Wall Street friendly president. They at least understood the need to, take a certain amount of pressure off the necks of the poor. Otherwise, they're going to get angry. This budget, it doesn't even care. It doesn't care anymore. They are going to rob the poor out in the open now. It's sick. It's disgusting. And, this is kind of like a radical alternative radio station I broadcast on. A lot of this is preaching to the choir, but we all got those conservatives in our family, those Trump supporters in our family. And, you're not going to sway them with all the rubbish that they put out about, all this Putin puppet garbage that the media keeps peddling. Talk about these policies, man. They are horrible. They are absolutely horrible, and they're going to destroy the lives of people that all of us love very much. So, I think I'll go ahead and sign off for the night. I want to thank y'all for listening. This has been the Hoodrat Strategist radio program. Do want to shout out a couple of things coming up this weekend. And sorry I haven't really been keeping up with an activist calendar like I've been wanting to, but just a shout out. Tomorrow, anybody in the black community who's listening, Black Arts and Cultural Center are doing a special private screening of Black Panther tomorrow. And by the way, all you social justice activists, homework assignment, go see Black Panther like 10 times if you want to. We usually don't support, big media conglomerates, but very excited about Black Panther. On Friday, February 16th, from 1 to 4, the My Neighbor Association is hosting Show Me the Money Day, which is basically about helping young people financially plan, talking about home ownership, that kind of stuff. On Saturday, February 17th, there is going to be a candidate forum for all of the Democratic candidates who are trying to challenge Fred Upton. As of now, I believe that's going to be Eponine Garrett, David Bannock, Rich Eichholz, and Matt Longjohn. That's going to be at the Paw Paw District Library at 2 o'clock. But hey, if you don't have a car, you don't feel like driving all the way out to Paw Paw, it is going to be live streamed. So if you want to check out, see CD6 candidates answer some hard questions, it's from 2 to 4 on Saturday, and there will be a live stream. And at 7:30 p.m. on Sunday, the theater department is hosting a Black Lives, Black Words Kalamazoo event. And that's going to be it's going to be a poetry and music event centered around the question, do Black Lives Matter? It's going to be a lot of performance art exploring the Black experience. And there's going to be a pre-show performance from Last Gasp Collective. They're really dope. Check them out. It's going to be in the York Arena Theater. And again, that's going to be Sunday at 7:30. And want to make sure anything else we got going on. Excuse me. That'll really be it for the week. But anyway, I want to thank y'all for tuning in. This has been the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR, your only source for political revolution.